Positioning your images on the screen is actually fairly easy. First of all, you can just put your image wherever you want it on the page and it'll just show there. So here we have it right below my headline and it works just fine there. But let's add some text. So I add some text in. And this actually works great because the text is in a paragraph and the image is right above it, like it's in its own paragraph. But what if I want the image to be a part of that paragraph? So I'm going to put the image right inside that paragraph. So it's actually going to become a part of the paragraph. That's not exactly what I was expecting. As you can see, the image is here, and then the first line of text, in fact, you can even see it when I highlight over that text. The text is almost like it's trying to take up the same amount of space for that first line as the full image. That's because the image is acting like it's in line with the text. So it's sitting there on the same line, and that's usually not the design that you want. Usually you want that image to kind of have the text wrap around the image and have the image just float next to the text. So what we're going to do is add a CSS property called float and add it to the image. And the float takes that image and it says, bring this out of the flow of content and have the content flow around it. In this case, we want it to float to the left, so the content is going to flow around that image to the right. So now you can see that the image is on the left and the paragraph is on the right. If I actually add another paragraph of text, it will continue to float around that image, and there's the image margin on the bottom and the line height of the paragraph text, which is creating this space around the image. Now, obviously, this right-hand side of the image is jammed right up next to the text, so you'd want to affect the margin of your image or the margin of your paragraph so that it isn't quite as jammed up next to it. But in terms of getting the image positioned, that's a great way to do it. You can also float it to the right. Now notice I didn't change the location of the image in my HTML. The image is still down here, right in front of that first paragraph of text. But when I change the float to right, the image pops over to the right-hand side. Again, you're going to have the same issue with the margin being tight. Now, because English is left aligned, you're going to notice less of that margin here because it's not jammed right up against it. But you still want to adjust those margins so that your image doesn't jam right up against the text that it's floating inside of. The other thing people often want to do is center an image. And centering an image is a little bit trickier. You don't have to change the location of the image in the HTML, but instead of floating, because you can't say float center, you do the margin left, auto, and margin right, auto, just like we did in an earlier lesson. Now the reason it's not centered right here, even though I've added a margin to it, is because images are a special case. Most elements in HTML are either text, where they're inline elements. So like when you type a piece of text, unless you give it a specific style, it's going to go right up next to the text that came before it. This sentence is showing up right next to the sentence before it because it's inline text. Images, however, are like paragraphs in that they're blocks. They're actual blocks of content. But when it comes to centering, they actually display as inline text. So you have to actually tell the browser, oh, by the way, treat this image as though it's not inline, but a block. So you have to change your images to say display block. Then your image will center itself. Now the reason this makes a big difference is because, as you saw in the earlier lesson, all you had to do to center the element was to say margin left auto, margin right auto, and it's centered. Images, however, you have to tell it display block. Now, with div tags, if you were to center it using margin left and margin right auto, and then add the display block, that wouldn't hurt anything. It's just repeating what the browser already knows. Yeah, that's a block. The other thing you might want to think about is one of the challenges I have with images especially when you float the image, is sometimes, we say float left, sometimes if you have space between the image and the text, there's a little bit of a space that shows up before the top of the text. And you can correct that by moving the text right up next to the image. This is one of those things where a lot of people don't notice. So if you don't notice it when you're looking at your web pages, then I wouldn't worry about it. Some browsers don't do it. If you notice that the browsers that your customers use don't add that extra space, then it probably doesn't matter. But it's something to think about when you're adding your images and your HTML. If you see that space, get rid of any white space between the image and the text next to it. And that's how you align images in HTML and CSS.